Hello everyone. How come that a German dialect spoken by a small number of people in about half of the British Isles went on, in about 1500 years, to be spoken by billions of people around the world? Where did English come from? Where was it first spoken? Well, when we think about English, we naturally think about England, but the problem is that England didn't exist at the time, and English came from overseas. So our story begins at the end of the 4th century, when the area which we now know as England and Wales was a province of the Roman Empire called Britannia. At that time, the population was predominantly Celtic, and the main languages were Latin and various Celtic languages. Towards the end of the 4th century, the Roman Empire, particularly the Western Roman Empire, was under enormous pressure and suffered a series of invasions. As a result of this, starting in the year 388 AD, the Roman authorities decided to pull out of the province of Britannia, and then left the Celtic population to fend for itself. By the beginning of the 5th century, the whole of Europe was suffering from invasions from various populations, and the British Isles were no exception. Various groups started to invade Britain, and the groups that interest us are the Angles and the Saxons. The Angles and the Saxons came from what is now northern Germany and the Netherlands. Perhaps we could also add the Frisians to this group. In fact, if you listen to the Frisian language, which is spoken in the north of the modern Netherlands, you can understand that it's very close to English. All of these groups were speakers of Germanic languages. Over the next few centuries, these populations established kingdoms in an area that is more or less correspondent with what is now England. These kingdoms varied in size and power, and over this period of 2 or 3 centuries, naturally the new kingdoms were founded, others failed, and were conquered by their more powerful neighbours. As you can see on this map, I've included the small kingdoms of Sussex and Essex, which were later taken over by the more powerful kingdoms of East Anglia and Kent. This was a period of warfare and turmoil, so this map is just like a photograph, but it gives you the basic idea of what things were like at the time. The Celtic populations were driven from the fringes of the British Isles and are labelled on this map in blue. To be honest, the Anglo-Saxons were not very neighbourly people. They used the word wellas to describe the Celts. Wellas can be translated either into foreigner or slave, which pretty well sums up their attitude to the locals. And the word survives in modern English as Welsh. I'm sure you've all heard of Hadrian's Wall, which was a fortification built by the Romans between the Irish Sea and the North Sea. It was to protect the Roman province of Britannia from the populations further north. You may be less familiar with Offa's Dyke. Offa's Dyke corresponds more or less with the boundary between England and Wales, which runs from the Bristol Channel northwards to the Irish Sea. It's not a fortification, it's a ridge made of earth to clearly define the boundary between the Welsh Celts to the west and the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia to the east. It was built on the instructions of King Offa of Mercia, and hence the name. As you can see from the photograph, it is still there today, and it's possible to walk the entire length of the dike. If you are ever in that part of the world, I would strongly recommend it. Considering the attitude of the Anglo-Saxons to the Celts, it's not surprising that very few Celtic words survive in modern English. There is the word crag, meaning rock, tor, meaning peak, the names for rivers like the Thames and the Avon, or should we say the Avons? There are several river Avons in England. Avon was the Celtic word for river. In the modern Welsh, it's Afon. Instead, the names of some of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms certainly survive into the modern language. We have the counties of Essex and Sussex, less official regional names like Wessex and East Anglia. Mercia is used as the name of the Midlands Army Regiment and a police district. A lot of Anglo-Saxon place names survive, particularly in the south and the west of England. If you think of names like Reading, Worthing, or Woking, ing means the people of. Then we have ton, T-O-N, as in Taunton, Brighton, Clacton. Ton effectively means village. It has become town in modern English. We also have Ham, as in Birmingham, Tottenham, if you're a football fan, Chesham. Han means farm. Over subsequent centuries, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms became Christians, and some of them became great centres of learning, in particular Northumbria and Wessex. Unlike the kingdoms in Europe, there was much more translations from ancient texts in Latin and Greek, and so on, into English. Also, oral stories were written down. But what was English like at that time? Well, if you look at these German words and their modern English equivalents, you can see what the root of English really is. Old English was a Germanic language. It had much more in common with many other Indo-European languages in Europe today than it does with modern English, particularly the Germanic ones, German, the Scandinavian languages, Dutch, and so on. For example, nouns were either masculine, feminine, or neuter, and it was only in Middle English period that this custom started to die out. The adjectives and other words had to agree with the gender of the nouns, just like German, for example. The other differences were, for example, the use of you. So, for example, there were words like you and thee, thy, etc. This is very similar to what we see with du and sie in German today. The English speakers abandoned this again, probably starting in the Middle English period, and now we just have you, except in some dialects. Verbs are also inflected, so the first person, second person, and so on. This survives a little bit with the third person in English, I do, he does, etc. But these are basically a few linguistic fossils from a time when the verb form changed for every person. I've been using the terms Old English, Middle English, and Modern English, but what exactly do they mean? Effectively, it's like this. Old English was much closer to the modern German languages, as we've seen, and it's considered to have lasted from about 450 AD to 1150. This was a very general, but scholars have to draw the line somewhere, and naturally, over this period, the language varied and changed. Here is a translation of the Gospel of Luke in Old English. I'll show you the translation into Middle English and to Modern English in a moment. Middle English is said to have lasted from about 1150 to about 1450, and it was a kind of transitional phase. As you can see, some of the words seem to be more recognizable. And then from 1450 to the present day, we can see Modern English. Here is a copy of the same Gospel from the King James Version of the Bible. Obviously, all of these forms of English could be subdivided, like into early modern English and so on. This is just to give you an idea. I'm not going to try and read these, but I'll leave a link to a website in which you can hear how people believe these forms of English were pronounced. However, we mustn't get ahead of ourselves here. There was another major influence on English. In this period, England was invaded by another population. This is a population that brought terror and destruction and slaughter over large parts of Europe. They also inflicted the verb get on generations of long-suffering learners of English. I'm talking about the population generally known as the Vikings, but that will be the subject of the next video in this series. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please click on like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll be back very soon. Bye for now.